So the big story is obviously Indiana losing Tyrese Haliburton. This week, Haliburton creates so much for the Pacers offense, both as a scorer and as a passer. Despite losing him, however, the Pacers were able to quickly regroup and beat Boston, and then they won their most recent game against Washington. How are the Pacers able to successfully adjust so quickly after losing a player who's so essential to everything they do?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting because time's a flat circle, right? Because at this time last December, the Pacers made a starting lineup change, and they ended up rattling off 8 wins out of 10, and then Tyrese got hurt. And then after that, they went 1 of 9 over the next 10 with him being injured, and they just never regained that same magic even after he came back. So now they make a starting lineup change. They go 8-1. He gets injured. And this time they're doing a lot better at regrouping on it. Just like you said, the second half coming out against Boston, I think a big key to it is they're very deep at the point guard position, despite how good and fantastic Tyrese has been as literally almost an MVP candidate. So TJ McConnell was a big part of what they did in that second half, particularly because Boston likes to try a lot of weird things on defense, and it's fascinating, like particularly this week, everything that they do differently with Drew Holiday, whether that's morphing in and out of man and zone, whether that was being really aggressive, weakening Tyrese Haliburton. Their pick and roll coverages were very good. Against TJ, they actually tried to put Kristaps Porzingis and Luke Cornett as his primary matchup and just sag off and play clear into the paint, despite the fact that he was the only ball handler on the floor. And he really took advantage of that, and their transition defense struggled. So that's where the Pacers are really going to thrive. And if we're being honest, it also helped that Jason Tatum wasn't playing. He played pretty well against them in the prior matchup, so that was a help. And it also helped that they were playing the Washington Wizards in the next game. So we'll see how they fare here coming out, going on this extended road trip without Tyrese. But I do think that they're a little bit better equipped than they were last year to handle it. And they've talked about the fact that, it's going to have to look differently without Tyrese as well. I mean, you could tell right off the bat against Washington that Rick Carlisle has really relaxed how much play calling he does when Tyrese is at the helm. He was calling a lot of plays without Tyrese at the helm. They're having to focus a little bit more on defense. So their play style, I don't think, is going to be quite the same.
So one of the stories this season with the Pacers has been their defense or lack thereof. However, in their last 9 games, where Indiana has gone 8-1, the Pacers have held teams to 114.8 points per 100 possessions, which is 10th in the league during that span per cleaning the glass. And if any listener out there thinks, oh, they must have played an easy schedule, 6 of those 9 games were against Milwaukee, Boston, Atlanta, and New York, all teams with a top 8 offense. How much of this recent defensive improvement is real versus a mirage?
I think it's a combination of both. When they made the change to the starting lineup the day after Christmas and ended up going back to what they went away from last year, which is putting Jalen Smith back at the 4, and part, I think that was motivated for a number of reasons, and that they had given up like 150 points to the Clippers, and James Harden was doing snow angels on the sideline, and they knew that they needed to put an emphasis on defense. So by doing that, it allows Aaron Nesmith to play at the 3, which is his more natural defensive position. He's not giving up as much size. Also, like individual defensive rating is, it's not an individual stat, but the only starter for the Pacers who had a negative swing net rating was Obi Toppin. So they made an adjustment there. And then also all 3 centers have been playing pretty well for them. So it allows them to keep playing all 3 of them to an extent. But it was also, they wanted to make clear that, look, like the guys are going to play who are making a commitment on defense. So I think that on the one hand, you can tell from an execution standpoint that some of it is better. Like just for an example, the Pacers started the year, they did not double team mismatches at all. Like that's why they limit so many 3-point attempts. They stay home. They do not have very many closeouts. Like if you look at Second Spectrum, they're one of the lowest teams in terms of closeouts because they're staying and trying to limit 3-point attempts. Then they kind of found out, like, look, we have no size. We can't do that. So they play a game against the Raptors. They're very proactive doubling Pascal Siakam, but their rotations out of those double teams were abhorrent, like really, really bad, knowing that they want to be in shift position, rotating from the next nearest defender and then keeping those rotations in front. You could tell they were a team that didn't do it. And now when you watch them do it, they're more connected. You could tell that they're more on a string and know where rotations need to be. That being said, when you say how much of it is real, overall, opponents haven't shot terribly against them from 3 on the whole, but they've caught a lot of opponents in this stretch on very bad nights. So you'll see that Houston made 5 threes. That's not something that you're really controlling. You can control the location and the volume of 3-point attempts. You can't really control the percentage. And then I would also say that there's just yes, this is a tougher schedule, but the opponents they were losing to during the 1-7 stretch were very uniquely positioned to give the Pacers problems. A team like Orlando, a team like Minnesota, they don't have guys who can guard Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards and handle Paolo Banchero. So those matchups are something that I think that aspect's going to continue to linger. The fact that they don't have players who can guard big wings is a lingering issue, and probably why the Pacers are getting mentioned with basically every big wing that's out on the market.
Right.
Yeah. So back to the offense. Haliburton has become one of the most dominant offensive players in the NBA. Thinking ahead to the playoffs, what kind of defensive strategies have been most successful against Tyrese so far this season? And are there any teams, personnel or schemes that are particularly suited to slow him down?
Chicago in the fourth quarter earlier this season had quite a bit of success just having Alex Caruso face guard him and be physical, so that they were having to run offense more so through Bruce Brown. Similarly, Orlando in the first game, when the Pacers had the really lopsided loss and had their worst half-court offensive rating in the first half of that game, Jalen Suggs was very physical with him, because one of the things they'll do when it's, TJ, Andrew Nembhard, Bruce Brown running offense is they'll use Tyrese as like the stack screener, have him get loose out to the wing, and then make plays from there. And they were preventing him from even being able to set those screens. And then it was forcing the Pacers to have to get into next actions. But I would say that Boston, honestly, this week as a whole was probably the best that I've seen. He was 5 of 17. The book on Tyrese is to weak him to his left. And some teams aren't as successful with that because he is still very good at stopping and popping and automatically shooting going to his left. But if you're able to stay on his hip and funnel him into the mid-range, he takes floaters with his right. So it's going to be an automatic, contest right to his right hand. Derek White was very good at that. And then just mixing up however many different coverages that they were using. I mean, it was very telling of the Pacers and some of the holes that they still have in terms of what they need to be a contender, and that Drew Holiday in the second half was guarding Tyrese Haliburton on the logo and face guarding him and not even looking at the fact that Ben was having a screen set from Isaiah Jackson. Like, clear out on the logo, just standing there staring at him. So, yeah. So I would say that Boston as a group was the best that I've seen somebody do so far.
Kind of related that, I was reading your post about the different ways they're trying to hide Tyrese Haliburton on defense, specifically against Boston, who came out in that first quarter of the first game and were just targeting Haliburton almost every play. And I think you said that Indiana scored 20 points in that quarter. Haliburton was 0 for 4. Do you think that might be a viable way of just like slowing him down by putting him in so many actions defensively that you just try to wear him out?
Yeah, and that was the flip side of the coin. I mean, Jaylen Brown even touched on that and admitted that, like, that was our strategy, was to put him in as many actions early so that, what he does in transition, maybe he doesn't have the same energy stores to be able to do that. So the Pacers did try to make a number of adjustments. One thing that they did is they've had him use show and recover a lot more this year than you would have seen last year, so they're not giving up that switch. The problem, though, there is like Aaron Nesmith fights tooth and nail. Like, that guy would run through a brick wall through his teammates, but if he's still staying on Jason Tatum, like, Jason Tatum can still shoot over the top of him. So, and then Boston was like, well, if you're going to show and recover, then we're just going to slip the guard screens, at which point the Pacers have been more active, where like the guy guarding the corner will then do a kick out switch. They will take that guy slipping, and then Tyrese will peel off and go to the corner, which is pretty effective for him because he really does play passing lanes quite well. He has a good size for position. He's pretty good at anticipating that. So that was helpful, but we'll see if they continue to do that, how teams adjust and counter for it, because the only team I've seen them do that against so far is Boston, really, because they've eliminated some of the peel switching from their defense that they did last year.